Hi, I'm Jennifer from Shabby Fabrics. I'm going to teach you how to do something called self-binding. Now, usually when I have, I finished my quilt top and I've selected my backing fabric, my binding is usually different than my backing fabric. It may be a fabric that, just something I prefer to be different than the backing. But sometimes, as in the case of this quilt, where the backing and the binding are the same, I will do something called a self-binding technique. So just know that if you do the self-binding technique, whatever on the back will wrap around and become your binding as well. So make sure you do like that fabric very much. And when you have that in mind, you almost have to know it ahead of time. What I mean by that is when you have something quilted, and this was quilted, so we piece our block together. This is a piece from one of the beautiful maple leaf quilt. This is a kit we have available at shabbyfabrics.com. We went ahead and quilted. Let's just pretend like this is our entire quilt. You obviously wouldn't quilt one block at a time. We're just pretending that this is an entire quilt top. And of course, you always have batting and backing in excess that's beyond the shape of the quilt that's out here. Now, normally, if you were going to use a different fabric for binding, you would take your ruler at this point, you would straighten that up and clean that off, and you have a nice clean edge and you'd apply your binding. We're not going to do that here because we're going to use that backing to wrap around to the front. Now, as you can imagine, I need to get rid of this batting, right? How am I going to go about doing that? The first thing I'll do is just kind of separate them apart from one another and roll that back, all the way back. Very important. Some people even like to pin it back here, so they know that is truly out of the way. Now, I'm not as fond of that because the pin heads tend to, they don't lie very smoothly this way. But you get the idea that that needs to be absolutely, completely out of the way. And for that reason, sometimes I will even, when I trim up the batting, trim not exactly along this line, but just a slight distance away from it, just because I don't want to cut that backing fabric. Okay, so now I've done that, and I've kept that out of the way. You would, of course, I like to do opposite corners. It's just how I function. Again, you're going to get this out of the way. Make sure it's not kind of creeping back on you. Come in and trim again. I'm lining everything up, trying to square everything up, and continue this way. So of course we would do the other two sides. In fact, let me just do those. You can we'll fast forward through that. So I just want to get it to that stage. Okay, so now we're ready to go. Now this is a lot of extra fabric out here. My rule of thumb when I do a self-binding is typically I will cut 1 inch. So let me show you what I mean. There's the edge of my block, or in this case, it would be a quilt, right? We're visualizing it's a quilt. And I'm gonna run my ruler right along that edge, and I'm gonna trim so that I only have 1 inch here. So I will end up pressing this, and I would do all the way around. But just for the sake of time, I'm only gonna show you the one side, of course, because you'll just repeat the steps. Actually, you know what? I'm going to show you one other side because I'm going to show you how to miter this. That's another cool trick that you can still do with self-binding. Okay. Boy, the black on black is tough to see. That's for sure. All right. And I would, of course, do the other two sides. Take this to your pressing mat and you're going to fold that in half. Since you started with 1 inch, this now would measure a 1/2 inch, and this just gives you an extra little bit of fabric to wrap around to the front. Now, some people like it to be not as much binding because they want that tip, for example, to be nice and pointy. Maybe you want to go with 7/8, or maybe you want to go with 3/4. A lot of this is going to depend on the loft of your batting. There are some battings out there, especially poly cotton blends, that are really poofy. So you might want to start with that 1 inch and then see how that functions for you. This is a pretty low profile batting, so I may go with maybe, again, 7/8 or maybe 3/4. Obviously, I'm going to kind of creep my way to it and see what works best for me. But because I do want a nice sharp point, I'm definitely going to trim that down to probably 3/4 or maybe the 7/8. But you get the idea. It's not one size fit all because the batting changes it. The loft of the batting changes it. But the point is the fact that how we trim the batting away, we now have trimmed our backing. In this case, we did a 1 inch. We think it's a little bit excessive. So let me just take this back. Let's go with a 7/8. Now I better get my glasses here for this one. That's not a measurement that I cut a whole lot, so I want to make sure I get that right. Of course, and we would do the same thing over here. And all the way around. So I'm just going to do the two sides for now. So let's take this back here and let's try that again. I'm going to come on this side actually. Work on here. It's a little bit easier for me to see it. And we're just going to come over the edge like that. Okay. So you're just going to press all the way to the edge of your quilt and come over the edge. Now, this is one of the things I absolutely love. Wonder clips. I used to use pins, just like the old, and now I use wonder clips. They are just, well, wonderful. No pun intended. I hadn't planned that, but they're wonderful. They hold it in place. They're fun to work with. And this particular set is the Wonder Clips, the Breast Cancer series. They're limited edition. Of course, a portion of the sales goes to benefit breast cancer and people dealing with breast cancer, so breast cancer research. So I love that as well. Now, I want to show you how to deal with this corner. Miter corners are a beautiful thing. They're different. They're a little different with self-binding. Let me show you what I mean. Notice how, in fact, I might even unclip that so you can see it. I pressed that side in. Well, I have this side I pressed as well. So how does that work? You know, that side kind of presses over that side. See how I have that corner? I'm going to bring that in at a 45-degree angle like this, and I'm going to actually press. You see that? Then I will bring that side in and clip. That's where having a little bit of extra fabric is really helpful. And I'm going to bring this side in, and there's my miter. Do you see that? And just like any miter, it's a tender corner. You just want to be careful. You'll take extra stitches in the corner. Put a little clip there and hold that down. So I just wanted to show you how to negotiate the miter corner. Now, once everything's clipped down, you've trimmed everything around, you have a couple choices. You can go with a straight stitch just inside that edge, maybe 1/8, and in black, and you probably never see it. So you have an option of taking this to the machine at this point and just machine stitching that down, which is wonderful because self-binding, or not self-binding, but regular binding, I always sew that down by hand, which can be many hours, several hours, depending on the size of the quilt. Here, you could go ahead at this point and either machine stitch that down in a thread, but let's say you have a multicolored backing binding and you're not comfortable because no thread exactly works. No problem. Just get needle and thread. In fact, I grabbed some of that ahead of time and I picked a color that you'd be able to see. And then I will just get in here, hiding my knot, and I'm just going to do a blind stitch. And just like you would finish the binding to the back of the quilt, the only difference is now the stitches will be on the front. But if you're very careful, you pick a nice coordinating thread or one that's nearly invisible, you're just not really going to see those stitches. So that's all there is to learning how to make self-binding on a quilt.